Hey guys, and welcome to another Sonically Sound video. Today, we are going to look at EQ. There are different types of EQ, and there are different ways to EQ particular instruments, and different methods. In this video, we are going to cover the fundamentals of EQ, so that in future videos I can talk about how to EQ a particular instrument, and it can make sense. I'll be using Logic Pro 10 version 10.4.1. First off, before an EQ can make any sense, you need to understand frequencies and the range of frequencies. To make it as straightforward as possible, frequencies are the pitch that something is. Lower frequencies sound low-pitched, and high frequencies sound high-pitched. All sounds are a bunch of frequencies playing together. A sound that only plays one frequency tends to sound like this. Now, the average human hearing is between 20 Hz and 20 kHz. 20 kHz is 20,000 Hz. This, therefore, is what you will see on an EQ graph. This is rounded up, as you're probably not going to hear 20 Hz as it's much too low, and 20 kHz will be very high. Now I'm going to play the oscillator starting at 20 Hz. You probably won't be able to hear anything as it's too low, but I will slowly move it up all the way to 20k, and you'll start to hear it. But also, as it gets high to 20 kHz, you probably won't hear that either, as that's too high pitched. Let's have a listen and see how well you can hear. And you can see there, while it's playing at 20 kHz, you can't actually hear it, but it's clearly playing a signal as there's something going on over here. You would have noticed that as the frequency got higher, your ability to hear it probably got lower and lower. Now, this is to do with losing hearing. Everyone loses hearing over time. This isn't alarming. If you can't hear 20 kHz, I wouldn't worry about it. What's important though is that you look after your ears, because actually, hearing is really key to being a good mixer. And if I'm playing it at a frequency of, I don't know, let's say 8 kHz. And if you can't hear 8 kHz, that's probably a bit of a concern. But basically, it's down to good ears, good monitoring system, such as nice speakers or headphones. If you had issues hearing certain frequencies, it might actually be because you're just playing out of your laptop speakers rather than a good set of good quality speakers. Now that we've gone through that, we're going to look at two different types of EQ. This is a graphic EQ. You can see that each fader has a number at the bottom of it. These numbers correspond to a frequency. So you'll notice that there are a selection of numbers between 20 Hz and 20 kHz. This is because a graphic EQ isn't precise. It will reduce or boost selected frequencies around the frequency that you see at the bottom here. When using a graphic EQ, you really need to understand what you're hearing in order to turn the frequencies up or down, because all you have to reference are the numbers. There's no visual EQ. I have some sort of visual here, but that's because I'm using a Waves plugin. Most typical graphic EQs, especially the actual onboard ones, won't have a visual aid for you to use. Graphic EQs are typically for a PA system. The master output will go through the graphic EQ that has been made to tidy up certain frequencies. A typical setup would look something like this. So you can see the bottom frequencies are rolled off, because you don't need the frequencies that are this low, because no one can really hear those, and you're then working your speakers too hard on frequencies that don't even matter. And then the middle range can go kind of between up and down. It's basically to tidy up certain sounds that are maybe too harsh, or maybe some lower sounds that are just kind of getting in the way, just to kind of slowly bring it down. This obviously isn't exact. Each room is different, so I can't tell you how to EQ a room using a graphic EQ, because actually every sound is different. But this gives you a kind of idea that it shouldn't be too harsh. You shouldn't be moving this down and this up. The only time I would move a fader right up like that is if I know for a fact that 2.5k is a really harsh frequency that I want to get rid of. I would do it like that. But even then, I wouldn't really want to, because it's not just getting rid of 2.5k, it's getting rid of everything around it. Graphic EQs aren't just used for PA systems. You can use them on a master EQ to master your mix once you're done, but the same thing goes. It's going to sound different on different speakers and different headphones and stuff like that, so my advice would be to use it on several speakers and several headphones to make sure you get the perfect sound. The next EQ is called a parametric EQ. A parametric EQ is much more precise than the previous EQ we were looking at. It's simpler to use, and it's the basic EQ that is used on Logic and other DAWs. One reason it's so simple is because when I play something, you can see that it gives me a range of frequencies of the piano playing. I'll solo the piano so we can really see what it's doing. So that's showing me all the frequencies that are playing when the piano is playing. This means I can figure out what sounds are intrusive in the way. You can see that around here and there are quite spiking. The other thing that's good about the parametric EQ is if I were to grab this and boost it like that, you can see that as I did that, the level on here actually rose. So not only are you getting to see what level it's playing, you're getting to see the effect it has on the end. So if you wanted it to sound way more level and less in the middle, you could boost the high end, and that would then, you could see that it would create a more even plane. Now, although this EQ is simpler to use, like I said, it's actually a lot more complicated and you can do a lot more with it. There are three basic tools on this parametric EQ. So there's a high cut filter or a low cut filter, a low shelf or high shelf, and a bell curve. I'll start with the high cut. Basically, a high cut or a low cut is when you cut the low frequencies or you cut the high frequencies. They're also called high pass and low pass, just to make it confusing. So a low cut is a high pass and a high cut is a low pass. Basically what they do is they cut any frequency below the set frequency I make for it. So if I wanted to use the low cut, all I have to do is select the low cut here, the high cut one's over there. And then what I have to do is I set this frequency. This bit here shows me what frequency it's set to. Anything below 52 Hertz will be cut off. Now, the reason this is useful is, like I said before, a lot of the low frequencies we can't hear, and therefore speakers are playing these frequencies without it needing to be heard. So what you can do then is increase it, and then it will get rid of some of that low sound. It's also helpful if you're trying to get rid of a low sound on something like a room mic that has loads of frequencies, but really you're after the mid range and high end. You can cut it off like that. And then the high cut is exactly the same except the reverse. So whatever frequency I set it to, it cuts everything above it. This is good for the same reason if you want to just get the low end and not the high end. The next EQ feature is the high and low shelf. As you can see, it basically boosts everything below the frequency set. So the low shelf will boost everything below that frequency, and the high shelf will boost everything above that frequency. You might want to use this if you just want to boost all of the low end, and the same with the high end. You might want to boost all of the high end, like on a set of cymbals or something like that. It's really useful. Now the next one is probably the most important tool on this EQ, and you'll probably be using it the most, and that's the bell curve. Logic gives you 4 different bell curves, which is useful. Now what it does is, as I drag this up, it will boost or cut a certain frequency. Now you can see that this one's quite wide. It's boosting everything from there, going slowly up to the point of 445 Hertz, and then all the way across there. You probably wouldn't typically use it like that because that's boosting a lot and you don't really want to do that. But what you can do is adjust the bandwidth or the Q. This is adjusted through this feature here, the 0.30. If I bring that to be higher, it will get more and more narrow. Now what this allows me to do is I can then sweep across and find a sound that I want to boost, or maybe a sound I want to get rid of. So if I hit play, now you can kind of hear that's a bit ringy, and I might want to get rid of that, but actually I probably don't want to just completely cut that out because that's part of the sound. But for this example, I'm going to show you that I've been able to locate that sound that's now boosted there, and then I can just turn it down like that. So rather than getting rid of loads of frequencies, I'm just getting rid of that particular frequency and a little bit of those around it. That's useful for if you have a snare drum and you want to get rid of the rings. So when the stick hits the skin and the metal ring on the snare vibrates, that will create a few rings, and you might want to reduce that. Alternatively, you might want to boost something. You might find a particular frequency and you want to boost it. Probably not this narrow though. That's when you start making it a bit wider and you do something like that, so you get a bit of a middle range sound. The final thing to cover is the two methods of EQ, and I'll probably talk about this more in other videos. They're called Corrective EQ and Creative EQ. Now you might be able to figure out what that means, but basically Corrective EQ is when you play something like I just did and you get rid of the sound that is harsh or annoying, like I said about the ring on the snare or something like that, and you want to get rid of it. You basically do that across all the frequencies until you get rid of all the undesired sound. That's Corrective EQ. The other method is Creative EQ. Now this one is the opposite. So rather than getting rid of sounds, this is you trying to enhance sounds that are there in the recording but not as prominent. So in this particular instance, the piano is quite middle range and high end. There's not a lot of low range. So if I wanted to boost it, I could play it. Now you can start to hear the left hand a lot more in the piano playing. That's obviously very extreme. I probably wouldn't EQ quite that extreme unless I really needed it to be heard and it wasn't really in the recording. That's Creative EQ. And basically what I would do is I would do Corrective EQ first. I would make sure you have the desired sound you want by reducing stuff. And then once you've done that, either use the same EQ or put another one on and start enhancing bits. If your recording is good and you've recorded it clean and well, you'll find that you probably won't have to correct the EQ as much, but you also won't have to enhance it quite so much either. Maybe just little bits here and there, so your EQ will kind of look more like this, where it's doing drops and boosts but very small. That's the key. Basically, if you record something well, it will sound good. You shouldn't need to then work super hard on an EQ. When talking about sounds of an instrument, you might have noticed I've been using particular words. We'll go through some of those words now because that's very important when talking about EQ, what I want to boost and cut. So I've been talking about sounds like bass sound, boom or thud. So those three particularly are low range. So, you know, the bass sound obviously low range like a bass guitar. Boom, that normally with drums like kick drums has like a boom, and then a thud is also a kick drum, but they're all kind of low range sounds. If I'm talking about the body or boxiness, that's typically mid range. So body is kind of low mid, and I'd say that that's probably a positive word. You want more body in the acoustic guitar, for example, but boxiness is probably negative. Boxiness I would use to describe a vocal, because it sounds like it's in a box and it sounds really high mid-range and it just doesn't sound pleasant. It probably sounds a bit too harsh. You probably want to take some of that down. You don't always have to, but I'm just saying that's a particular example I would use it on a vocal. There's then also harshness, which is also high mid, and I just mentioned that actually when I was talking about boxiness, but I'd say it's a bit higher in the frequency range than boxiness, but it's typically with cymbals or vocals. Harshness is, I would say, around 5K and 8K. It's basically that sound on a piano as well that's kind of a bit just really cutting into your ears, and it's a particular frequency that the human hearing is really receptive to, which is why you need to kind of make sure it's not too loud because people find it really harsh. But you also get it on cymbals when they're crashing all the time. And then finally there's presence, and this is typically when I'm talking about vocals, but that is a high frequency thing. So when you want to give something a bit more presence, it basically just means boosting the high end. And typically when I want to give something presence, I will be using the high shelf. And I guess I say presence because we hear that way better. We hear the high frequency much clearer. So if you want that to really come through and have presence in the mix like a vocal, then you'll boost the high end so it really cuts through into the human ear. So that's pretty much the fundamentals of EQ. I mean, once again, and I'll say this probably in most of my videos, but this is a stylistic choice, and so it depends on what genre you're dealing with. So I can't really tell you this is how to EQ something, this is how to EQ this. It's actually to do with the genre, your stylistic choice, and really at the end of the day, it's about you experimenting and finding a sound you like. You shouldn't just go to mimic other people necessarily because you want to make your own sound that's your sound. I'm going to be doing some videos on how I would mix particular instruments, which should make more sense now after watching this video. So there you go, EQ. I hope you liked this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, or want me to cover a particular topic that I haven't done yet, comment below. Enjoy mixing, and I'll see you next time.